Dawn broke on June 10, 2024, at the Calexico port of entry in Imperial County, California, marking the start of another workday. The early morning air carried the dry heat of the desert and the characteristic hustle of one of the nation's busiest border crossings. A long line of container trucks and refrigerated vehicles snaked its way forward, patiently waiting for customs clearance. The roar of engines, the clamor of conversations, and announcements over loudspeakers created the familiar, complex symphony of the border. Amidst the noisy flow of traffic, a large refrigerated truck, painted white with the logo of Harvest Fresh Foods incorporated on its sides, slowly approached the customs inspection area. The driver, a man in his early 30s, stepped out of the cab holding a thick folder of documents and walked towards the clearance booth. According to the declaration, the shipment was high quality, inspected pork carcasses, ready for export to the Mexican market. All accompanying documents, from the commercial contract and animal health certificates to the invoices, were complete, clear, and valid. In theory, this was a green lane shipment, eligible for expedited clearance. However, the file for the shipment landed on the desk of Supervising CBP Officer Vincent Cole, the team leader on duty that day. Officer Cole was a veteran with over 20 years of experience at the port. His hair was graying at the temples, and his eyes, behind a pair of reading glasses, held a sharp, discerning gaze that no criminal could easily deceive. He flipped through the pages, scanning the details. Everything seemed perfect, but it was that very perfection that made him feel something was wrong. His professional intuition, honed by thousands of cases, big and small, told him something was off. He left his office and walked directly to the inspection area where the Harvest Fresh Foods truck was parked. Seeing a senior officer coming to inspect the vehicle personally, the driver seemed startled, a flicker of hard-to-conceal tension crossing his face. Officer Cole nodded a morning greeting and asked whose shipment it was and where it was headed. The driver, his voice slightly hesitant, answered that the shipment was from Harvest Fresh Foods and they were hauling clean pork to Mexicali, Mexico. Officer Cole walked a full circle around the truck, lightly tapping the side of the refrigerated container. He then asked about the temperature inside the trailer. The driver replied that it was set to 13F. Officer Cole narrowed his eyes. -13 degrees Fahrenheit. For preserving standard frozen pork, a temperature of 0F was more than sufficient. Setting it lower did not significantly improve preservation but wasted a considerable amount of fuel. A cost-conscious business would never be so wasteful unless they wanted to preserve something more specific, something that required a deeper freeze to completely halt decomposition. The seed of suspicion began to sprout in the veteran officer's mind. In a calm but firm tone, he ordered the driver to open the trailer door a crack so he could take a look. The driver's face paled slightly as he protested that the shipment was sealed and opening it could compromise the temperature and the quality of the goods. Officer Cole's voice hardened as he replied that he would take full responsibility. He stated that regulations were regulations, and if the driver failed to cooperate, he had the authority to detain the entire shipment for a full inspection. Knowing he could not refuse, the driver reluctantly climbed up, used a pair of bolt cutters to snip the seal, and pulled open the heavy metal door. A blast of frigid air immediately rushed out. But accompanying that blast was not the faint, gamey smell characteristic of frozen pork. Instead, it was a strange, acrid, and deeply unpleasant odor. It was a chemical-like smell mixed with a very unusual tang of iron, a smell unlike any animal he had ever encountered. Officer Cole, who was familiar with every imaginable cargo scent, immediately recognized the anomaly. He signaled for a younger officer to bring a high-powered flashlight. In the beam of light, hundreds of pinkish-white pork carcasses hung neatly on metal racks, appearing normal. However, tucked away in a few concealed spots deep inside, he discovered several large white styrofoam boxes, cleverly placed between the hanging meat. It was an unscientific and deliberately hidden arrangement. His suspicion now piqued. Officer Cole knew he could not let this go. He made a bold decision. He announced clearly that the shipment was to be detained for inspection and that a full search would be conducted. He instructed the driver to step out of the vehicle and come to the office. The order was given, and the inspection area immediately became a scene of urgency. The truck was moved to a separate, secured area. The entire task force was mobilized. The trailer doors were thrown wide open, and the cold air, thick with the strange smell, billowed out. The customs officers, even while wearing masks, felt nauseous. Each pork carcass was carefully unloaded. As the officers moved deeper inside, They brought out the white styrofoam boxes. The boxes were surprisingly light, with a few lines of hastily scrawled Chinese characters on the lids. Officer Cole asked the driver, now escorted by 2 officers, what was in the boxes. The driver stammered that it was pork offal, explaining that his company had a new product line packaged with a new vacuum sealing technology to maintain freshness. A young officer was ordered to open one of the boxes with a utility knife. Inside, dozens of transparent, vacuum-sealed plastic bags were neatly arranged, tightly pressed against the objects within. Each bag contained a soft tissue mass resembling a heart, a liver, or a kidney. They were a deep red, looking clean and professionally packaged. The young officer, somewhat relieved, remarked to his boss that it looked like high-end pork organs, which would explain the careful packaging. Most of the team agreed. The packaging was unusual but seemed plausible with modern technology. But Officer Cole did not think so. He put on a pair of gloves and picked up a bag containing what looked like a kidney. With decades of experience handling all sorts of goods, his eyes caught irregularities that an inexperienced person would miss. This pork kidney was slightly larger than normal. More importantly, its color, despite being frozen, had a fresher red hue, and the structure of the lobes, visible through the clear plastic, seemed more complex and different from the thousands of pig kidneys he had seen before. A chill ran down the veteran's spine. He brought the package close to his nose. Even through the layer of plastic, he could detect that unusual metallic tang. He stood silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the bag in his hand. His silence made the atmosphere tense. The younger officers began to realize the gravity of their superior's demeanor. Finally, he turned to his deputy, ordering a halt to all inspection activities and a complete lockdown of the area. He instructed them to take the driver to a separate interrogation room. Then he looked at the young officer who had opened the box, his voice low and decisive, carrying an indescribable weight. He instructed the young officer to take one of the bags immediately to the county's veterinary lab for a rush DNA test to determine the species, stating his feeling that it was not pig offal. The silence in the CBP task force office at the Calexico port of entry was so thick you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Supervising Officer Vincent Cole sat motionless, his gaze distant, but his mind was entirely focused on the phone on his desk. Nearly an hour had passed since the sample was sent for rapid testing. To others, it might have seemed like an overly cautious procedure, but for him, it was an hour of tense anticipation, a terrible premonition taking shape in his mind. Finally, the phone rang. Cole answered on the first ring. On the other end was the hurried, horror-laced voice of the lab technician. The technician reported that the preliminary DNA results were in. The tissue sample was not porcine. The DNA structure was confirmed as human. Although he had prepared for the worst, hearing those words sent a cold shock through Officer Cole's body. His hand tightened on the phone. It was all clear now. His instinct was right. Hidden behind the shipment of clean pork was not commercial fraud or simple animal smuggling. This was a major criminal case, a heinous crime of trafficking in human beings. Cole commanded in a low, powerful voice to seal all evidence and the results immediately, ordering absolute secrecy as he prepared to report to higher authorities. Without a second's hesitation, an urgent call was made directly to the Imperial County Sheriff's Department. The full details of the case, from the initial suspicions to the DNA results, were reported. Recognizing the extremely serious and transnational nature of the case, the county sheriff immediately ordered the formation of a major task force, mobilizing the most elite investigators. Captain Leo Morgan, head of the Criminal Investigations Division, a seasoned officer known for his decisiveness and sharp mind, was appointed to lead the task force. That same afternoon, the task force's first target was identified: Harvest Fresh Foods Incorporated and its CEO, Brian Hughes. A summons for Hughes was executed swiftly and unexpectedly when detectives arrived at the company's headquarters. Hughes, a man in his 40s with the polished appearance of a successful businessman, acted utterly shocked and outraged. In the interrogation room at the sheriff's department, he displayed a perfectly cooperative attitude, repeatedly insisting that he and his company were victims. With a voice dripping with feigned injury, Hughes claimed to be in complete shock, insisting that Harvest Fresh Foods had always operated in strict compliance with the law and that its inspection processes were rigorous. He asserted that this was undoubtedly an act of sabotage. He suggested it was highly likely that during transit, the driver, Tony, a known gambling addict, colluded with outside criminals to hide contraband in the truck. He demanded that the sheriff's department investigate and deal with Tony harshly to clear his company's name. Hughes proactively provided all the company's business licenses, credentials, and recent export contracts. On the surface, everything was perfect. Harvest Fresh Foods was a relatively new company, established about 2 years ago, with all the necessary legal paperwork. It had even received a few local awards for food safety. The scenario Hughes painted was plausible, shifting all blame to a single weak link, the driver. However, Captain Morgan and his investigators were not easily fooled. While one team continued to question Hughes, a financial crimes unit was ordered to analyze Harvest Fresh Foods' entire cash flow and financial activities for the last 6 months. And it was here that the first cracks in the facade began to appear. A financial investigator reported to the captain about massive irregularities in the company's books. In the last 6 months, their pork export sales had skyrocketed, 5 times higher than the same period last year. But what made no sense was that their reported after-tax profits were extremely low, nowhere near commensurate with that huge revenue. Their cash flow showed signs of being artificially inflated. Digging deeper, financial experts uncovered a sophisticated money laundering network. Harvest Fresh Foods was constantly receiving large sums, up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, from shell companies registered in Hong Kong and Macau. Almost immediately after receiving the funds, an equivalent amount of cash would be withdrawn from the company's accounts through a series of small transactions carried out by individuals with no connection to the business. The investigator concluded that it was a classic money laundering operation. The revenue from pork exports was just a cover to legitimize dirty money, and their real profit was not on the books. Harvest Fresh Foods was clearly just a front company. This information solidified the task force's suspicions. At the same time, the interrogation of the driver, Tony, had a breakthrough. Initially, he insisted he knew nothing and was just following company orders. But faced with evidence of unusual phone calls, his nervous behavior at the border, and the psychological pressure of knowing he was not just hauling contraband but human body parts, Tony finally broke down. Trembling, he confessed he did not know it was human organs but knew it was a special shipment. For each of these runs, he was paid an extra $1,500 in cash, 10 times his normal pay, and Mr. Hughes had told him to keep it absolutely secret. Captain Morgan asked directly where the cargo was picked up, questioning if it was at the company's main facility. Tony admitted that it was not. Whenever there was a special shipment, Mr. Hughes would call him from a different number and give him directions to a cold storage warehouse in the county, out near the Salton Sea, about 15 miles from the company. He described it as a deserted place, surrounded by abandoned fish farms. Tony's testimony was the golden key the task force was looking for. It confirmed that Harvest Fresh Foods had secret, off-the-books operational facilities. Immediately, a plan for an emergency raid on this secret cold storage warehouse was drawn up. Under the direct command of Captain Morgan, dozens of detectives and SWAT officers secretly surrounded the warehouse area pointed out by Tony in the early hours of the next morning. It was a lone warehouse standing isolated in a desolate, arid region, with no signs and no guards. The order was given, and the police force stormed in from all directions. The corrugated metal door was breached, revealing a cold, silent space inside. The warehouse was divided into 2 sections. One area stored boxes of ordinary frozen pork, like a normal warehouse. But in the deeper section, separated by an insulated door, was an entirely different world. Dozens of large white styrofoam boxes were stacked high. Next to them were large chemical containers labeled entirely in Chinese, with no import documents. The air was thick with the distinct smell of chemicals and the same metallic tang Officer Cole had detected at the border. The forensics team carefully opened one of the styrofoam boxes. Inside were vacuum-sealed plastic bags containing human organs, packed in dry ice. Searching the chemical containers, they found a large quantity of medical supplies like scalpels, surgical clamps, absorbable sutures, and, most disturbingly, hundreds of blood bags and bottles of specialized preservation solution. It was all too clear. This was not just a transit warehouse but also a processing and packaging station before the goods were shipped out. Faced with the irrefutable evidence found at the secret warehouse and the driver's testimony, CEO Brian Hughes finally bowed his head. He admitted that Harvest Fresh Foods was just a cover for an illegal trafficking operation. He claimed he was only a hired manager for the public-facing activities, and the real power behind it all was a force whose identity he dared not reveal. The case had made a huge leap forward. The task force had successfully peeled back the first layer of the criminal organization. However, a larger question loomed. Harvest Fresh Foods and this warehouse were just the logistics and transport links. Where did the supply of the human organs come from? Who had the medical expertise and the ruthlessness to perform the initial harvesting? In the task force command room, Captain Morgan stood before a whiteboard, underlining the name Harvest Fresh Foods. He drew a large arrow to an empty box next to it and wrote a new question. Tapping a photo of a vacuum-sealed organ, he noted that while logistics and finance were clear, these things required professional medical skills. The next directive was to find the butcher. Captain Morgan's order opened a new and thorny line of investigation. Vetting medical facilities required caution, secrecy, and a high level of skill, as any misstep could alert the entire criminal network, causing it to go deeper underground. A special team, comprising criminal investigators and officials from the County Department of Public Health, was formed. Their task was to screen hundreds of private medical facilities in Imperial County and neighboring areas. The list was gradually narrowed down, focusing on surgical clinics capable of performing complex operations. One name quickly rose to the top of the list: Dr. Howard Miller, 55. Miller was a highly skilled surgeon who had previously worked at a major hospital before opening a large private clinic in the city centre. Publicly, Miller's clinic was a reputable establishment. But in underworld circles and through police informants, his name was often associated with shady rumours. It was said that Miller was willing to perform off-the-book surgeries to treat injuries from gang fights without reporting them and had complex relationships with many local crime figures. Dr. Miller's file was immediately placed on Captain Morgan's desk. At the same time, the Financial Crimes Unit discovered anomalies in the doctor's finances. Although his clinic's reported income was high, Miller's actual assets, including multiple luxury properties and huge expenditures, far exceeded his legal income. Large, untraceable cash deposits were frequently made into his accounts and then quickly withdrawn. Captain Morgan stated that while all signs pointed to him, rumors and financial questions were not enough for a conviction. They needed physical evidence. A covert surveillance operation on Dr. Miller's clinic was launched. Several experienced detectives were deployed, disguised as taxi drivers and street vendors, maintaining a 24/7 watch on the clinic. During the day, the clinic operated normally, bustling with patients. But as night fell, unusual activities began. Detectives noted that after 11 p.m., long after the clinic had officially closed, unmarked panel vans would silently enter through a back gate. Accompanying these vans were burly men covered in tattoos. Most disturbingly, they did not arrive empty-handed. They often carried in young men who looked exhausted and dazed, appearing like patients but showing no signs of being there voluntarily. After about 3 to 4 hours, the vans would leave, and Dr. Miller was usually the last one to turn off the lights and go home, looking tired but satisfied. The photos and videos captured by the detectives became undeniable evidence. Clearly, Miller's clinic was more than just a place of healing. At night, it transformed into something else, a place where criminal acts were committed. With sufficient grounds, the task force decided to act. An emergency search warrant for Dr. Miller's clinic and private residence was approved by the district attorney's office. In the early morning hours of a mid-June day, just as Dr. Miller returned home after a long night's work, multiple teams moved in simultaneously. Miller was apprehended at his front door before he could react. At the same time, a larger, fully equipped team broke into the clinic. The search was meticulous. The first and second floors, used for regular patient care, revealed nothing unusual besides modern medical equipment. But Captain Morgan knew the real secret was not here. He paid close attention to the building's blueprints. There was a discrepancy in the usable floor space between the basement and the upper floors. It seemed a large space in the basement was not shown on the plans. After a search, detectives found a wall in the basement's medical supply storeroom that showed signs of recent construction. When they knocked on it, it sounded hollow. Without hesitation, Captain Morgan ordered them to break it down. The drywall was quickly demolished, revealing a sturdy steel door with an electronic lock. It took the technical team nearly half an hour to disable the security system. The door slowly swung open, revealing a sight that horrified everyone present. It was a complete, surprisingly modern operating room, hidden with incredible sophistication. All the equipment was state-of-the-art: a hydraulic operating table, high-intensity surgical lights, anesthesia machines, heart rate monitors, and even specialized freezers for tissue preservation. The walls were lined with thick soundproofing material, ensuring no sound could escape. And what they found inside was even more horrifying. In a medical refrigerator, dozens of blood bags of various types were neatly arranged. On an instrument table, several scalpels and surgical clamps still had dried blood on them. And in a refrigerated metal container, investigators found a human kidney and liver, preserved in a solution, carefully packaged like merchandise. At the sheriff's department, faced with surveillance footage and the undeniable physical evidence from his secret operating room, Dr. Howard Miller initially tried to deny everything. He claimed it was a backup operating room and the organs were for scientific research. But when Captain Morgan played security footage showing tattooed gangsters escorting a pale, nearly unconscious young man into the clinic through the back door the previous night, Howard Miller completely collapsed. He knew all his lies were now meaningless. Miller mumbled his admission, confirming the operating room was his and that he had performed the surgeries. Captain Morgan pressed him for details about the surgeries and the victims. With his head bowed, Howard Miller confessed his entire role in the criminal network. He was the medical link, the organization's butcher. With his skills, he was the only one who could perform the organ removal surgeries cleanly, ensuring the quality of the product according to orders from his contacts. For each successful surgery, he was paid a huge sum of money. Greed had turned a talented doctor into a monster. Captain Morgan asked the most critical question: who brought the victims and who was the leader? Knowing he could not escape and hoping for leniency, Miller gave up the person above him. He named the man who brought him the shipments and connected everything as Scar Hector, whose real name was Hector Ramirez. The name Hector Scar Ramirez was no stranger to the detectives of the Imperial County Sheriff's Department. He was a notorious gangster with a long rap sheet filled with charges from public disturbance and aggravated assault to organizing illegal gambling. However, in the last few years, Hector had seemingly gone straight, leading many to believe he had reformed. But with the new information from Dr. Miller, the task force knew Hector had not reformed at all. He had simply moved into a different, more sophisticated, discreet, and far more profitable criminal enterprise, trafficking human bodies. Immediately, all information on Scar Hector and his activities was compiled and analyzed. Informants quickly confirmed that Hector was currently running a large-scale illegal casino under the guise of an abandoned warehouse in a Calexico industrial district. This was his main lair, the place he used to generate the supply for his evil network. A full picture of their methods began to emerge. Hector's victims were not random people kidnapped off the street. His victims were desperate gamblers who willingly walked into his casino, only to be squeezed dry. Hector and his cronies used rig games and offered loans with exorbitant interest rates right on the casino floor. Once trapped, the gamblers would quickly sink into a mountain of debt they could never repay. And when the debtors were completely unable to pay, Scar Hector would appear. He did not beat them or use traditional debt collection methods. He offered them a way out: sign a form voluntarily donating an organ to clear the debt. Threatened by tattooed enforcers and overwhelmed by desperation, most victims felt they had no other choice. After signing, they would be detained, waiting for an order to come in, and then taken to Dr. Miller's secret operating room. This method was incredibly cruel yet brutally effective. It turned victims into volunteers, creating significant challenges for any investigation. Captain Morgan explained in a briefing that they could not just raid the casino based on what they had. If they did, they would only catch the gamblers and a few low-level enforcers, while Hector and the ringleaders would slip away and destroy the evidence of organ trafficking. Most importantly, they would not be able to find out who was behind Hector. He concluded they needed to get inside. A bold and risky decision was made: send an undercover detective into the lion's den. The man chosen for this near-impossible mission was Detective Frank Barnes, one of the most experienced undercover officers in the department, with a track record of successfully infiltrating and dismantling complex criminal organizations. Within 2 days, a perfect cover story was created for Detective Barnes. He became Frankie, a small-time construction contractor from San Diego who had just gone bankrupt due to a gambling addiction, now on the run from creditors and looking for a big score in the border town casinos. With a disheveled look and the perpetually anxious eyes of a man down on his luck, Frankie easily blended into Scar Hector's casino. The casino was located in a massive old warehouse, heavily guarded by dozens of burly henchmen. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and money. Hundreds of gamblers were engrossed in games of dice, baccarat, and poker. The sounds of shouting, cursing, and chips clattering created a chaotic, mesmerizing symphony. Detective Barnes, as Frankie, began his plan. He acted like an inexperienced but desperate gambler. He kept losing, but the more he lost, the more he chased his losses. In just one night, the small amount of cash he brought was gone. As expected, a loan shark approached him, offering a hand now that he was out of cash. Frankie nodded. He started taking out loans, diving back into the games, and continued to lose. Within a week, through the house's clever manipulations and his own skilled acting, Frankie had become a major debtor. With a debt, including interest, of nearly $25,000, he was officially on Scar Hector's radar. Throughout this time, Detective Barnes was not just focused on losing. His eyes were like a hidden camera, recording all activity inside the casino. He identified the key players, the operational patterns, and especially the process for dealing with debtors. He noticed that every few days, a gambler who had lost everything would be taken into a private room at the back of the warehouse. They never returned to the casino floor. He also secretly gathered crucial intelligence, overhearing conversations among the henchmen about a processing facility in an unincorporated area near Nyland, where debtors were taken before surgery. He memorized the license plates of 2 panel vans regularly used for transport. When his debt was large enough, Detective Barnes's moment arrived. He was invited into the private room by Hector's men. Sitting across from him was Scar Hector himself, a square-jawed man with a long, menacing scar on his cheek. In a low growl, Hector informed him of his $25,000 debt and asked for his plan. Frankie feigned extreme fear, begging Mr. Ramirez for a few more days. Hector sneered that there were no more days but offered another way to pay it off, quick and easy. Hector pushed a typed piece of paper towards him. The title read, Voluntary Organ Donation Consent Form. This was the moment Detective Barnes had been waiting for. He knew he was about to be taken to their final lair. He pretended to hesitate, then, with trembling hands, signed the form. Immediately after he signed, 2 enforcers escorted him outside and pushed him into a waiting windowless panel van. The van sped off into the night. Inside the dark cargo area, Detective Barnes knew he had only one chance to alert his team. He secretly activated a tracking device and sent a pre-coded text message from a miniature phone hidden in the sole of his shoe. The message was just a few short words, but it contained all the danger of his situation and was the go-ahead for the entire task force. Fish on the hook, heading to the Nyland facility, go. The action code was given. Without a second's delay, Captain Morgan shot to his feet. His voice, sharp and decisive, broke the silence of the command room as he ordered all units to their positions and activated the takedown plan. In less than 15 minutes, a massive force was mobilized. Over 100 officers, including the most elite detectives, heavily armed SWAT teams, and a medical unit prepared for the worst, secretly departed, moving in multiple columns towards the Nyland area. The orders were clear: ensure the absolute safety of the undercover officer and any victims, and capture the entire criminal cell, leaving no one to escape. Meanwhile, at the abandoned processing facility, Detective Frank Barnes was facing the most intense moments of his career. After being pushed out of the van, he and 3 other men miserable debtors were herded into a large, damp, and filthy room. The air was thick with the smell of blood, chemicals, and despair. In the room, Scar Hector was perched on an old metal table, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his cold eyes scanning his prey. Standing next to him was Dr. Howard Miller, who had just arrived. The doctor put on rubber gloves and checked his gleaming surgical instruments with a chilling calmness. Hector asked in his gruff voice if the stock looked healthy. Dr. Miller replied curtly that it was good, adding that blood samples and preliminary tests were all compatible with the orders and that they could do 2 cases that night. Hearing this exchange, the other 3 men trembled violently, their faces drained of all color. They now understood the tragic fate that awaited them. Detective Barnes, though his own heart was pounding, had to maintain his role as a terrified victim. He huddled in a corner, his eyes darting around, trying to memorize every face, every detail of this den of evil. Outside, the thick darkness provided the perfect cover for the police force. The assault teams had silently closed in, forming a multi-layered perimeter around the warehouse complex. Every exit, including the smallest footpaths, was sealed. A drone with a thermal imaging camera was launched, transmitting live images back to the command vehicle, allowing Captain Morgan to monitor all movement inside. A scout reported over the radio that they had a visual of 14 subjects inside. 4 hostages were being held in the main building, and Hector and a subject believed to be Dr. Miller were in the eastern section. Captain Morgan looked at his watch. It was time. His voice echoed in every officer's earpiece as he commanded all assault teams to stand by and gave the final countdown to execute the raid. The command was given, and from all directions, dark figures burst from their hiding places. The SWAT teams, with ballistic shields and rifles ready, moved like ghosts. The main and side doors of the warehouse were blown open by specialized breaching charges. Inside, Hector and his crew were caught completely by surprise. They never imagined their fortified lair could be stormed so swiftly. A voice boomed through a megaphone, identifying the sheriff's department and ordering everyone to stay down with their hands on their heads. This was followed by a series of warning shots and the blinding glare of powerful spotlights, disorienting the criminals. In that moment of chaos, Detective Barnes acted. He lunged, using a practiced martial arts move to take down the henchman nearest to him, seizing the knife from the man's belt. He shouted for everyone to get down, officially revealing his identity. Scar Hector, with the instincts of a cornered animal, grabbed a metal bar and prepared to fight his way out. But he was immediately swarmed by 3 SWAT officers with shields, who knocked the bar from his hand and slammed him to the floor. Cold handcuffs quickly snapped around the notorious gangster's wrists. Dr. Miller was so terrified he just threw his hands in the air, trembling as he surrendered on the spot. All 14 criminals in the facility were apprehended. Not one escaped. The 3 victims were rescued in a state of extreme shock. The raid was a complete success. At the sheriff's department, faced with being caught red-handed with all the evidence, Scar Hector knew his criminal career was over. But as a cunning veteran, he was not going to take the full blame. He looked for a way out, or at least a path to leniency. In the interrogation room, after hours of silence, he finally spoke. He admitted the casino was his, the debt collection was his doing, and he was the one who contacted Dr. Miller. He then looked up, staring directly at Captain Morgan, but claimed he was not the one calling the final shots. He described himself as just a shield, a manager in the US who got a 40% cut to handle all the dirty work. Captain Morgan asked, his tone unchanged, who was behind him. Hector hesitated. He knew that giving up this name meant facing retaliation from a power even more terrifying than the law. But between revenge and a death sentence, he chose to live. He bargained, asking if they could guarantee his family's safety. Captain Morgan replied that the law protects those who cooperate. Hector took a deep breath. He made his decision. He said in a voice barely a whisper that he was just an employee. The man behind it all, the one who controlled him and the doctor, the one who ran the entire supply chain from the source there to the market in Mexico, was Philip Dunn. The name Philip Dunn, uttered by Scar Hector, sent shockwaves through the entire task force. This was not an unfamiliar name. Philip Dunn, 50, was a well-known tycoon in the real estate and logistics business in the border states. Dunn's public image was that of a successful, sophisticated businessman who frequently participated in charitable activities. No one could have suspected that behind the facade of a philanthropist was a cold-blooded kingpin, the head of one of the most inhumane criminal rings ever exposed. Captain Morgan knew they were facing an enemy on a completely different level. Dunn was not a street thug like Hector or a greedy intellectual like Dr. Miller. Dunn was a true criminal mastermind, a man with the money, power, and cunning to cover all his tracks. Immediately after Hector's entire operation was dismantled, the task force anticipated that Philip Dunn would have been alerted. He would not just sit and wait, he would try to flee. A special arrest warrant was issued for Philip Dunn. All movements of his companies, bank accounts, and close associates were put under surveillance. As predicted, just 3 days later, a crucial piece of intelligence came in. Philip Dunn, who was supposedly abroad, had secretly returned to the US. He was hiding out in a private villa near the Salton Sea and was planning to escape by boat that very night, June 20th. Time was running out. A plan to capture the kingpin was drawn up in a matter of hours. The most elite forces of the Imperial County Sheriff's Department, in coordination with the US Border Patrol, were mobilized. A dense network was cast over all land and sea routes leading out of the area. On the night of June 20th, 2024, darkness enveloped the region. Around 10 p.m., Surveillance team spotted a black luxury SUV leaving Dunn's villa, moving at high speed towards a small private marina. The target was on the move. The pursuit order was given. Dozens of police cars and special motorcycles simultaneously emerged from their hiding spots, forming a tightening pincer. The cunning Philip Dunn quickly realized he was being followed. He floored the gas pedal, the SUV roaring down the coastal road like a wounded beast. A breathtaking chase ensued. However, every one of Dunn's escape routes had been anticipated. As his vehicle turned onto a single-lane road leading to the water, 3 SWAT vehicles emerged from the darkness, blocking his path. Pinned in, Dunn's SUV lost control and crashed into a guardrail. Police forces quickly swarmed the vehicle. Philip Dunn was pulled from the wreck, his face showing no change in expression, only cold, venomous hatred in his eyes. The final mastermind, the kingpin of the criminal empire, was finally in custody. At the sheriff's department, Philip Dunn displayed a completely different attitude from his accomplices. He was not panicking, nor was he denying his crimes. He calmly admitted to everything. With the mindset of a CEO, Dunn coldly recounted his entire criminal supply chain. He viewed human organs as a special commodity with high value on the black market. Scar Hector's casino was the resource extraction zone, the debtors were the raw materials. Dr. Miller was the head of processing, and Harvest Fresh Foods was the logistics and export department. He had built a perfect criminal empire that had operated smoothly for years, bringing him obscene profits. Dunn's emotionless demeanor and disregard for human life disgusted even the most seasoned investigators. On September 25, 2024, the Superior Court of California, County of Imperial, opened the trial for the transnational human organ trafficking case, a case that had captured national attention due to its scale and brutality. Due to its serious nature and to ensure the safety of witnesses and victims, parts of the trial were held in a closed session, but an atmosphere of tension and outrage surrounded the courthouse. In the courtroom, the leaders of the criminal network from the kingpin Philip Dunn, the gangster Scar Hector, and the butcher Dr. Howard Miller, to the front company CEO Brian Hughes, all stood in the dock to face justice. Their arrogant expressions were gone, replaced by anxiety and fear. The Deputy District Attorney for Imperial County prosecuted the case. The indictment was read, each word a hammer blow exposing a perfect and inhuman criminal supply chain. From Philip Dunn masterminding the entire operation, to Hector using a casino to create and coerce debtors, to Dr. Miller using his medical knowledge to turn his clinic into a human slaughterhouse, to Harvest Fresh Foods being set up to launder money and transport the goods across the border, the entire network was laid bare. The cross-examination was intense. Hector and Dr. Miller, faced with irrefutable evidence, confessed to their crimes and pointed to Philip Dunn as the ultimate mastermind who directed everything. They testified that every order, what product to source, what parts to take, how to transport them came directly from Dunn. Philip Dunn himself, despite his earlier confession, tried to deny his role in court. He argued that he was merely a businessman who had loaned Hector money and had no idea how it was used. He attempted to paint himself as a victim. However, the kingpin's cunning could not deceive the court. A mountain of evidence was presented: financial records of the sophisticated money laundering, wiretapped phone calls between Dunn and Hector, and the testimony of his co-conspirators. Against this wall of evidence, all of Dunn's denials became absurd and only fueled the outrage in the room. In the closing arguments, the prosecutor declared this a transnational organized crime case involving acts so monstrous they trampled on the most basic values of society. For boundless greed, the defendants had turned their fellow human beings into commodities. Their actions were inhuman, beyond the scope of rehabilitation, and needed to be permanently removed from society. After deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, and the judge delivered the final sentence, a sentence commensurate with the crimes committed. The presiding judge, in a voice filled with steel and indignation, declared that defendant Philip Dunn, as the mastermind who organized and directed this entire criminal enterprise, had shown a complete depravity of morals. For the crime of murder for financial gain and leading a criminal conspiracy, the court sentenced him to the highest penalty, death. He sentenced defendant Hector Ramirez, as an active enforcer who directly managed the casino, threatened and detained the victims, and was a critical link in this chain of atrocities, to death. He sentenced defendant Howard Miller, who as the medical link abused his knowledge and betrayed his Hippocratic oath to personally commit the inhuman act of harvesting organs, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Other accomplices, including Brian Hughes, the driver, and the henchman, received severe sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years in prison, depending on their level of involvement. The sentences were read to a silent courtroom. Justice had finally been served. The Harvest Fresh case was officially closed. It had completely dismantled one of the largest human organ trafficking rings ever uncovered, rescuing numerous victims and restoring a measure of peace to the community. But the case also left behind a horrifying lesson, a warning about the degradation of morality and the depths of human cruelty when greed eclipses all else. It showed that the line between a successful businessman, a healing doctor, and a monster in human form can sometimes be terrifyingly thin.